Alright, so what's the latest on James Bradberry and why could a trade now be possible? Plus, an NFL insider believes Philly's ultimately where Justin Simmons ends up. Meanwhile, Vic Fangio is about to unlock Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. But why should you be confident in the new DC scheme, and how is he going to be able to get the most out of the new additions? Plus, it sounds like DeJean's about to get a bigger role, so let's talk about it. But first, let's run it. What's up, guys? We are into June, which is crazy. But speaking of June, James Bradberry is still on the roster, even though a cut could potentially happen with a much smaller $4 million dead money hit since we're past the June 1 cutoff. Or if you're Jimmy Kempski, then the argument is JB's more likely to get traded, since teams can now spread out dead money over multiple years instead of just one season, which is what the Atlanta Falcons waited to do with Julio Jones when they traded him to Tennessee back in 2021. And another case in point, the Cleveland Browns did the same thing with Baker Mayfield to Carolina in 22. So for the Eagles, trading Bradberry instead of releasing him would save a little over $1 million in guaranteed salary. Of course, that's all fine and good, but who would want him?
Our prices have never been lower! Okay, stop it!
I think a lot of us would sign up for just about anything you can get in return for JB. However, if you listen to new DB coach Christian Parker, then perhaps JB may stick around.
Seen him a good amount, and even the a couple of days that he hasn't been here, he's communicated. We've talked on Zoom or on the phone. I think he's very motivated. James is a real professional. He's played in this league long enough that he understands what comes with playing the corner position in the NFL. So he's had a great mentality. He's worked hard. He's learned the defense just like everybody else, and we're looking forward to seeing what he does this year.
Okay, personally, I don't know if I'm buying it, and his price has to for sure be dropping. Although speaking of price drops, Justin Simmons continues to plummet, as Albert Breer still believes the Eagles are the most obvious choice for the all-pro safety to sign with, citing the familiarity with Vic Fangio and the Eagles DB coach Christian Parker, plus a clear-cut path to playing for a contender. Now, I hear you, some people have said that Simmons doesn't want to play for Fangio or doesn't want to come to Philly. However, we've heard just as much, if not more, about a potential reunion there, so I wouldn't count it out. Plus, while Howie missed on the last veteran safety signing in Kevin Byard, Simmons is a much better fit and still playing at the top of his game. I highly doubt he'd end up being a bust if you get him. Just like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter aren't busts, despite some idiotic takes from Marcus Hayes. And no, I'm not even going to get into that because it's, not even worth my time. What is worth my time talking about is DeJean, who's been showing out at camp, especially with his versatility. And it's safe to say has a bigger role coming.
I think Coop is very he's very versatile. I think he plays with good vision to the ball. I think that he has good ball skills. So we're kind of in that process now. We've moved him around a little bit. He can handle it mentally. And I think as we move on through this phase right now and going into training camp, then he'll have a home. But he's playing corner, he's playing nickel. He's handling those things well, and we'll continue to put more on his plate and see how he handles it.
Again, it's early, but hearing what we have so far, I'd expect Coop to handle the extra responsibilities well. At the same time, it's also worth mentioning that Parker spoke very highly of Avonte Maddox, and he's very confident in his ability to impact the game, which is honestly the same to be said for Philly's interior guys. First off, both of them are coming in the best shape of their lives. And Fangio has really high hopes for them, saying they're going to play a lot. Honestly, for anyone familiar with the defensive coordinator's philosophy, that's not really surprising anyway.
People are not expecting as much out of players as we used to expect. And these players will work and give you everything they got within reason. And there's too much of, and that starts at an early age, when they're in high school, college, everybody, less is more type thing. They preserve your energy. You guys hear it in the NBA and load management. And I talk to coaches from other sports that I know, and, it drives them crazy. But the players are willing to work. Never had an issue with that. And they're still willing to work. But we, as the so-called adults in the room, need to push them.
All right, everyone has their limits, yet the old-school ball coach's philosophy has definitely paid dividends. For example, Miami's Christian Wilkins played 300 snaps more than Jalen Carter last season, and despite being a number 13 overall pick, it's not a stretch to say Wilkins hadn't lived up to the expectations yet. Except that all changed last season under Fangio. For real, the 28-year-old had the best season of his career by a mile with 9 sacks. In case you were curious, the DT hadn't had more than 4.5 sacks in any of his first 4 seasons. So Wilkins is probably pretty thankful for Fangio's teaching. Since his performance led to him becoming the 5th highest paid defensive tackle in the NFL after signing with the Las Vegas Raiders in free agency. Again, this is a dude who is thought by a decent amount of people to be a bust. Of course, he's not the only example for production in the interior. Since think back to when Fangio was the Chicago Bears defensive coordinator and a guy by the name of Akeem Hicks joined the Monsters of the Midway. This former third-rounder hadn't done much of anything in his first 5 years in the league, registering just 9.5 sacks total. That is until joining Fangio's system and rattling off 3 straight seasons of 7, 8.5, and 7.5 sacks. Now, having said that, I'm not arguing that Jordan Davis is going to become the next Wilkins or the next Hicks or even have anywhere like 7 to 10 sacks. However, it is pretty undeniable that Fangio knows how to get the most out of his players.
This idea that he's always one of those old school coaches who's got one way of doing things, and not true. I find him very adaptable to his talent. I mean, he's very good at identifying what his guys do well and sort of building his scheme and building his defense around them. And I know he's really good and remains so in terms of disguising defenses.
Look, I love hearing that. You love hearing that. And it's probably not a stretch to say this defense is going to be built around Jalen Carter. Yet I understand the argument about some Miami players being irritated with Fangio's persona and his old school mentality. Except that wasn't everyone. And based on what the Eagles have said so far, they love the mindset from the 40-year vet.
When things aren't going good, you need to go back to basics. I'll tell the players early in camp that if we're struggling, don't expect me to magically scheme our way out of it during a game. We're going back to basics, and we're going to call the things that we've been practicing since day one, and we got to fight our way out of it. And if you don't have that foundation and you're always grabbing for the perfect call, you'll be okay for a little bit, but eventually you're going to get gashed.
Gosh, don't we know it, and isn't that the truth? Like the bend but don't break became take what you want because we're completely lost. I mean, ultimately, it just became too easy on opposing quarterbacks. However, thankfully, that won't be a problem this year.
It's pre-snap. You're not going to know where they're going to be. He plays a lot of cover 6. Cover 6 is half-field coverage, right? So you get 4 and 2 on different sides. The point is, for a quarterback, those half-field structures, the pre-snap movement, it really does muddy things up. And when you look around the league at the best quarterbacks, they're really aggressive. This scheme has given the best quarterbacks trouble. That's the reason that you're seeing a bunch of his disciples kind of take the league by storm. And then I think nothing's more telling than in 2019, there was an interview for ESPN and Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, and Matt LaFleur were asked which defense is toughest to read and attack. And that defense is Vic Fangio, according to all of them. That was in 2019. And that makes sense because in 2017, Kyle and Vic, it was 15-14. Bears, you remember these games, right? Yeah. 15-14 Bears. 2018, you guys beat Sean McVay 15-6. I remember that game, and then beat Kyle Shanahan again that year 14-9. And so
but to your point, it's the bend but don't break. That's the motto. Chris, there's only a few units in the league that you don't have to bat an eye when you hear about you're not worried about their game plan. You're not worried about how their unit's going to perform. I would say Vic is on that short list of coaches.
No question.
On the defensive side of the ball.
No question.
Come on, Fangio should really alleviate concerns, although I get it for some of those kind of on the fence. Especially with the argument that this is the same guy whose defense gave up 48 to the Bills and 56 to Baltimore. And I don't really know what to say about Baltimore. I mean, sometimes there's a clunker here or there, or maybe the defense quit on him. However, on the positive side, Fangio's not immune to evolving to what's required.
I would argue that going back to the last couple of years in Denver when he was head coach, and since then he was out for a year, obviously, I think he's kind of evolved a bit. He's playing more man coverage. Everyone thinks of Vic Fangio as a cover 4 quarters coach, and obviously that's probably foundationally what he's done through the years. But he plays a lot more man coverage now than he ever has. So he has evolved with the times.
Exactly, which is why Fangio definitely made life difficult on Dak by speeding up his internal clock, playing a ton of press man, and using well-timed blitzes to beat Dallas. Oh yeah, which is similar to the adjustments he made the second time they played Buffalo, even though Miami still lost the game. But to his credit, Fangio's defense had Josh Allen confused and only allowed 14 points all game. Realistically, the offense is what cost them, since Miami went 4 straight 3-and-outs before an interception ended the game. And then the playoff game against Kansas City was ungodly cold, especially for the Fish. But either way, there's no doubt in my mind that Fangio is the right man for the job in Philly. Heck, the Eagles wanted him 2 seasons ago until Jonathan Gannon ruined it with his antics. Now fine, I'll admit that nobody's perfect, and personally I kind of like an attacking defensive style, but to hear all these other offensive coordinators admit it's the toughest to scheme against is definitely promising. Anyway, having said that, how do you guys feel about Fangio's defense, and how do you think he maximizes Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis? You know what, while we're at it, let's just give away the Breadman's jersey. You know the drill. Just do me a favor and hit that like button, and then make sure you're subscribed if you aren't already, and then type in Breadman in the comments section, where I'll randomly select one lucky winner to win a Jalen Carter jersey of your choice during my Friday night live stream, so good luck to you. Now, obviously, JC's not the only impact on the defense, and neither is Jordan Davis, but to hear new defensive coordinator Clint Hurtt speak about the dancing bear, you gotta get excited.
The number one thing for him is just being in the best shape that he possibly can be in, and he's taken huge strides with that this offseason, and it's still always, it's a work in progress, but he's off to a really, really good start. If he's in great condition and he can play all out to, not using bad language, but to the wall If you get my drift on that, then he's going to be a hard guy to block. You know, he's a huge man, long arms, strong. He can get up and down and make tackles in the tackle box. The number one thing for him is conditioning. Can he be in great shape? And we're off to a nice start with that.
Obviously, JD's not the only pleasant surprise with OTA standout like linebacker Zack Baun, who linebacker coach Bobby King said has really been impressing, especially in coverage. And of course, cornerback Isaiah Rodgers, who Christian Parker was aware of his ability, but also saying he's been even better in person. Still, a long way to go, yet no doubt promising from camp. Which is why I had Pro Football Network's Anthony DiBona hop on to discuss Fangio's defense and everything else around the Birds. We should touch on the recent news, or Adam Schefter dropping the news of the tampering allegations, kind of the situation with Saquon Barkley, also the Atlanta Falcons, the Kirk Cousins situation, if people are not completely familiar with it. Basically, as deals go down in free agency, Saquon Barkley, after he was signed, James Franklin of Penn State, I don't know if it was a slip of words or just kind of a misspeak or what the scenario was, but he alluded to the fact that possibly Saquon had conversations with Howie Roseman. Everyone knows, or most people know, that you can't do that. Certainly Howie knows that you can't do that. So it's a strange look, but the word is that we were going to get a resolution, possibly some sort of punishment this week. I'm curious to get your take on this. We have talked about this, 3-4 weeks ago, whenever it was. But any new thoughts on it? And also, do you feel like it's going to be some sort of punishment of a drastic measure, I guess, for Philly?
Well, I tweeted that when the news came out today. I think it's still going to be some sort of punishment. I don't think they're going to just not be punished at all. But I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as drastic as the Falcons situation, because Kirk Cousins himself literally spoke about talking to a trainer or whatever it was before he signed. So that kind of just blew up his spot right away. Whereas this is kind of a middleman said something on an interview where, like, you don't know what was really said. So, I mean, if they did do an investigation, which they did, but if they did find anything during the investigation, then obviously the Eagles would be in trouble. But I think Howie Roseman's a pretty smart guy. I don't think he would actually talk directly to Saquon, or at least where it was traceable for the NFL to pull evidence on it. So, but I think if they think something went down, then there might be some sort of late day 3 pick and like a monetary fine of some sort. But I don't see them getting fined multiple day 2 picks or a first round pick or anything like that, because I just don't know if they'll be able to really prove that they had some type of illegal interaction.
That's kind of where I'm leaning to. Although there are some that maybe the conspiracy theorists out there say that's why Michael Penix was drafted, right? There's hey, Kirk did this to us, so we're done with him. But anyway, that's a joke, obviously. We'll move on to OTAs because we'll keep everyone posted if something happens. I'm with you. Don't think there's going to be any severe punishments. More so probably for the Falcons, like we're alluding to. But for the Eagles, OTAs, the voluntary took place the last couple weeks. Some guys shining. We look at Vic Fangio's defense. They're making plays. Yes, it's early. It's not with pads, but there are interceptions all over the place, and that's good news for the defensive side. We can speak on what that means for the offense, but still, in the positive light, you've got defensive players that are making plays, Fangio's scheme, and you love to hear Jordan Davis saying, like, hey, he's a no BS coach. Like, he's going to not put up with anything. He's going to demand a lot from you. We've heard the press conferences before, but why specifically is Fangio's persona, his mentality, what he brings to this group, a really positive sign for the Eagles?
I just feel like, because we've said it before, but now they've tried to use the Fangio scheme over the past couple of years or so, but now you have the guy that literally created the system, that knows everything about the system, and clearly he has the attitude that it seems like the players are buying into. Obviously, that wasn't the case in Miami. It seemed like a lot of those players, especially in the secondary, weren't big fans of Fangio, but he made Christian Wilkins a whole lot of money. So, I mean, if the players in this defense are going to buy in, a lot of them are heading into contract years or prove-it years, even though they're on rookie deals where they kind of have to turn their careers around. So, I mean, it seems like Fangio, wherever he's been, has put players in a position to succeed, and he has 30, 40 years of coaching experience at the professional level. So, I mean, if they can't get it done with all the talent they have, and now with the coach that they have, it's going to be kind of a mess. But I think it seems like everybody's buying in early, and that's a really good sign.
Right. We've heard a lot of great things from the press conferences. And again, we can only take it for what we will at face value because we are so early. But at the same time, you talk about that, and Fangio is a little bit different in the sense of, I mean, I think as you look at some tape, there are some different breakdowns. Greg Cosell had done one previously, a number of others as well. But it's like, just because Fangio has that typical off-ball, not going to be as much of a man coverage, he has adjusted. And if you go back even to last season to look at some of the games, certainly there were some injuries that caused this. Or the first game against Buffalo, they gave up, I think, 48 points, and then they come back and only give up 14 because they still lose the game, but still they only give up 14. So you make some adjustments and see some differences there. I think hopefully that's the thought with Fangio. That's what a lot of people are alluding to or thinking is like, okay, look, to your point, we've got the father of that system and that scheme, but also it's throw a lot of the players in training camp, like he's mentioned, so that then when you get into the season, you're not a deer in headlights. We can make some adjustments. We can do some different things that we practiced, and we're not just, hoping and praying that we can stop a pass over the middle. So I'm interested to see how that works out. There's lots of players, kind of as you alluded to as well, who are going to have to step up and that we might see make some significant plays. Mainly, I think we have to start out with Isaiah Rodgers, because if anyone has been following anything worth anything in OTA so far, Isaiah Rodgers, I don't even think it's arguable, has been the standout in camp. Just the plays that he's making, showing no rust. You see all the articles and everybody else that's talking about him, but is this surprising? And I guess to what extent can we take away from his positive play in OTA so far?
I don't think it's really surprising, because if you look at what Vic Fangio did last year, the Dolphins drafted Cam Smith, the cornerback, in the second round and 51st overall pick, and he barely played. So, he might prefer playing these veteran-proven players. And obviously Isaiah Rodgers, when he did play in Indianapolis, was a top 5 quarterback according to PFF or whatever other stats people want to look at. But, the guy's produced. He produced at a high level. And obviously now with James Bradberry, it looks like he's on the way out. So I'm sure we'll dive into that more. But if they want to bring these younger guys along a little bit slower, and teach them multiple positions or whatever the case is, it seems like he's the most proven and the best option out there. And I wouldn't be surprised if he keeps it up, if we see him kind of sign an extension with the Eagles before the season even starts, maybe another year or two, because they see what they see in the practice, and they don't want to kind of let him hit the open market next season if they think he's going to outperform or earn a huge deal on the open market. Sure, you can get a compensatory pick, but if they see something that they like, they might want to lock him up now, even though they do have Quinyon Mitchell and Darius Slay and Cooper DeJean, just to have that added depth, because we've talked about it. This is the first time in a long time where the Eagles have a lot of cornerbacks that you can kind of trust to throw in there and see what happens. So I don't know if they want to give that up so quickly after one season, but we'll see what happens. It's obviously a positive sign to see him doing this well and starting right away.
It's really a fascinating idea and a great thought. I don't know why, but I haven't thought about that or pondered as much about, hey, get the extension done. But it's very much like a Howie Roseman deal, and it makes a ton of sense, like you alluded to or kind of laid out there, is obviously if he's making good plays and he's performing well, he's not an old corner. He's 26 years old and seems to so far not having any rust. If he parlays that, I guess no pun intended because he's the whole gambling thing, but like if he goes in the right direction, I've been told that I can't help but speak in puns. So it's unintentional, but it happens way too often. But if he does play well, to your point, he should be able to get paid because he's worth that, and he's proven it in the past. So if he can get back to that level, there's so many guys that can make this roster, but you're probably only going to take 7 at most, maybe even 6, depending on where you're looking at safeties or linebackers and all the other stuff there. One of them that feels like a guarantee, I think, for most people is Kelee Ringo. We've mentioned him a couple times, but he was at this media session previously 2 weeks ago. He was not. I don't know exactly if he had some personal engagements or things that he was taking care of there, but he was at this one, and he was getting some reps because Slay was not there, so good to see him get some first-team reps. Looked pretty promising, and from all accounts, he was able to break up a couple passes, almost picked off Jalen Hurts. But what do we take from Kelee Ringo? Because again, we look at all this depth here. Kelee Ringo is younger than, I don't know if all, but certainly most of the corners in the room because of his age. So still lots of potential, but expectations for Kelee Ringo this year and really just moving forward for the Eagles.
Well, I feel like last year he was kind of thrown into the fire a little bit earlier than they probably would have liked because of the coordinator change and the injuries or whatever the case was at corner. So, but like you said, with his age, I think I looked it up. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was only 3 or 4 cornerbacks in this year's draft were younger than Kelee Ringo. So, it's just pretty absurd when you think about it because now he kind of has a year under his belt. He had a couple starts last season as well where he looked pretty good for the most part. People wanted to rip him apart for a couple of plays here and there, but if you look at his tape as a whole, he was pretty solid considering the situation that he was put in. So, now you give him a full offseason working with a coordinator in Vic Fangio, working with new secondary coaches that have more experience. And I feel like it's just a much better situation for all of these young guys as a collective. So, Kelee Ringo, he's like I said, he showed potential I mean, he's going to make the roster because of his contract and where they picked him. But I think it's just the Eagles are still in just a much better situation at cornerback than they've been in previous years.
There's one of those too, and you talk about guys' contracts that make sense and who might make the roster. One that's not as keen on that, and we talk about Shon Stephens, right? So we'll bring up the UDFA, his ability. Had eight interceptions, I believe, now Division II, but still 8 interceptions, so clearly can take the ball away. Getting signed after rookie minicamp, shined from a very limited session. So he's doing things right. However, with the competition you have on this roster, who really knows? Now he signed, I believe, is a multi-year deal? Do you remember how long that was?
3 years.
3 years.
It's I think undrafted it's the standard is 3 years.
Okay, I was gonna say it was multi-year. Couldn't remember. So 3 years. So that doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. I've seen some comments saying, "Oh, well, it was multi-year deal." To your point, it's a standard there. But you have also made the case there's a lot of things to like with Shon Stephens, and especially if you're looking at him potentially with that slot corner, with some depth on that side, competition he brings to that position. Any changes, any thoughts with Shon Stephens? We've looked at Avonte Maddox, who's gotten several reps at slot, Cooper DeJean, and then even Tyler Hall this past time. So what do you see from the slot corner in the main competition there?
Well, I feel like Avonte Maddox is kind of the front runner now, only because we also see him being used at safety. So, I mean, maybe he's not the starter at slot corner, but I feel like if Vic Fangio is confident in him being able to play both backup slot corner and safety, then that's a huge bonus. And obviously that would help him stick around in the final roster. But then when you look at a guy like Tyler Hall, obviously he was brought in after they hired Vic Fangio, so that plays a factor. Obviously, I think he said it himself that he gave Howie Roseman kind of a list of guys that he liked and gave him feedback. So I think guys like that, Zack Baun, other guys that they added this offseason, I think you have to kind of give them the upper hand. But then Shon Stephens, the value of those undrafted free agent contracts and the fact that you have them under team control for 3 years or so at just like $800,000, $900,000 a year, it's such great value. If they can contribute even on special teams, it's a huge value to have when you're building out a roster, when you're paying 2 wide receivers $25 million or paying your quarterback big money. Having those guys on cheap deals for multiple years is huge when you're just building a roster out as a whole. So a lot of the times you see the Eagles kind of want to keep these guys and not really expose them to waivers. But I can tell you one thing, teams that need cornerbacks are going to be watching the Eagles at final cuts because there's going to be quite a few corners that probably shouldn't be cut, but they're going to be available and hit the waivers.
I'll just say, hopefully, I agree with you there, but hopefully teams that are looking at the Eagles and saying oh, hey, maybe there's a corner here or there. The main goal for me would be potential of wide receiver. And we can get into that here in a second because I want to stay with corners, but just the overall thoughts of wide receiver. And I've got a few questions again that we'll get into here in a second. But to keep this with cornerbacks for a quick second, James Bradberry, as of right now, as of the time of this recording, so who knows what takes place, and how quickly, but as the time right now, we're past June 1, and he's still currently on the roster. Now, to some people, that's surprising. However, we've talked about, it might not be on the actual day. We may have a few days of figuring things out, or Howie Roseman's still pursuing some trades, or you could go much further, right? You could still look at seeing, hey, what does he have showing up to voluntary OTAs coming up, or even training camp. However, you did kind of allude to it, mention it as far as, where we're at with James Bradberry. How quickly do you think that we might see him get moved soon? And we always need, the updated official Anthony DiBona percentage of him making the roster. So where are we at as of this recording?
My history percentage isn't good, but you have to keep bringing it up. So,
well,
I wouldn't put it very high because just the fact that he's not there. I know people posted on Twitter. I think he shared on his social media that he had some type of charity event or something like that, which is obviously great. You never want to take guys away from that. I feel like stuff like that should get more attention than it does, but that's another story for another day. But I mean, it seems like his days are numbered in Philadelphia because if you look at the talent they have already out there, Isaiah Rodgers is already playing well. It seems like guys are kind of already putting their stamp and their name in at that position. And the fact that he's not there, I know he's a veteran, he's experienced or whatever, but it's just not a great look for him not to be there. I think the real story is going to be when mandatory minicamp starts. And if he misses that, then that's obviously important. But I mean, for now, the Eagles could have cut him before with a post-June 1st designation. They had that option available and they didn't do it. So I still think that they might be holding on to him just to see if somebody else goes down on another team and they can kind of get a late pick swap or a late 7th round pick, especially if they get fined and lose a 2025 7th round pick or something like that. They can kind of get it back with James Bradberry, but it's not like they save a ton of money by trading him either. So, I mean, they're going to take a little bit of a cap hit regardless of what they do with him. But I just think, regardless, I can't see him being on the roster week 1.
The prices have never been lower for James Bradberry. Let's just say that. We're at that situation. Real briefly, I'll insert this there. And we didn't discuss this beforehand, but I kind of have to. It brings it to mind, talking about prices being lower. But Justin Simmons is still not currently signed. So in the same light, his prices continue to drop. And actually, Albert Breer, I believe it was yesterday or 2 days ago, had written an article, kind of a mailbag, but saying where does he think that Justin Simmons ends up? And he said the most obvious fit, which is understandable, is still the Philadelphia Eagles. And so time goes on. It seems like just about every single show or live stream or everything else, people will comment and say, hey, what about Justin Simmons? Is it impossible? It's not impossible, but it's one of those that you can make the case of the Fangio ties and familiarity with Christian Parker would be a great addition to the safety spot because there's really only 3 guys and, the whole ACL for Sidney Brown and him coming back and all that. But just to make sure, people don't need to totally give up on a Justin Simmons, right? I mean, there's still a chance. You're saying there's a chance.
Once again, I'm not going on percentage, but I think I wouldn't rule it out because obviously the experience with Vic Fangio matters. He seemed to have good things to say about him at the Pro Bowl when asked about the Eagles hiring him. So, but then you have Benjamin Albright, who's a Broncos reporter, that's saying that relationship kind of wasn't as great as they make it seem. That he doesn't really want to play for Fangio. So, I mean, he doesn't really put stuff out there that's not true. So, I mean, you got to kind of have conflicting things going on. So, I wouldn't rule it out because of the need and because of the unproven depth that they have at safety. I mean, if they have to throw Avonte Maddox in after just one safety goes down, I'm not sure how happy they would be with that. But I also don't know if they want to bump a guy like Reed Blankenship down to the bench and sign Justin Simmons and kind of disrupt that. But then again, Justin Simmons is an all-pro. So, I mean, I feel like if you can bring him in, I feel like they should have done it already if they were going to because it would be nice to have him in for the voluntary OTAs. But he might just be an older veteran that doesn't really want to deal with this stuff, and we'll see him just sign closer to actual training camp, and he doesn't want to lose out on 2 months with his family or do anything like that. So it could just be a situation like that. I don't know what's going to happen, but like you said, I'm not going to rule it out.
Again, there's a chance. It's not impossible, but I'm with you at the same time. If it feels like you probably could have gotten something done. The price has dropped to this point, so we'll see. There may be. On the note of Fangio in relationships or players, we talked about even Miami, some of the guys not really getting along with him or at odds for him going away, especially maybe some of the younger players because they weren't able to get inserted as quickly. I don't think that there's as much of a concern, but I've seen a few comments and had a couple questions as well. Naturally, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean have not seen much of the field, if hardly at all, for first team. I think there possibly was like 1 or 2 reps, if that, from OTAs, at least what was reported. Granted, it's very early. We still have mandatory coming up and then, of course, training camp. But just curious kind of where people's mindset should be. This is not alarming, right? I mean, as far as just not seeing the rookies taking those first team reps yet.
Not at all, because, I mean, even before Vic Fangio got here, put aside what happened with Cam Smith in Miami. I mean, look at what the Eagles have been doing in recent years with players. Nakobe Dean barely played as a rookie. Nolan Smith barely played as a rookie. Jalen Carter is kind of the exception to the rule. And even then, he only played 60% or 70% of snaps. It's not like he was out there as an every down player. So then obviously Cam Jurgens barely played or didn't play as a rookie. So it just seems like they prefer bringing guys along slowly. Howie Roseman even said in his press conference that they kind of drafting 1 year ahead and these guys being able to learn from the veterans before having to play a full season as a starter. So maybe they kind of view them as starters in 2025. Obviously, fans wouldn't like to see that, especially given their situation with James Bradberry. But now if Isaiah Rodgers looks good at outside cornerback, I don't really think anybody's going to complain because if these guys aren't contributing or aren't being forced to contribute, then that means that they're getting good play from Slay and Rodgers and whoever's in the slot. So, I mean, it's a good situation to have. For the millionth time, they're in a much better situation at cornerback than they were in recent years. So it's definitely not a reason for concern. But, I mean, if these guys are playing, if the starters, Slay and Rodgers, struggle, and then these guys still aren't being thrown in there, then I would be concerned. But, I mean, right now it's so early. These guys are still learning that it's really not a reason to be concerned at all.
I'm glad you brought up Jalen Carter. I know that was a brief point from that past one, but it feels like a great opportunity to just insert this quickly and then move on. But there's some person who won't be named who potentially made the case or argument that Jalen Carter, I know that it was looped in with Jordan Davis, but Jalen Carter is a bust. I don't even really know what to say to that, but just to double check and make sure, because there are trolls out there, and depending on who you are, what you think about this. But Jalen Carter, I mean, my gosh, he's not a bust.
I mean, unfortunately, the person that wrote this is not a troll. They're a very real person, and this is what they think, or at least what their editor told them to write, or whatever. But that's another story for another day. We're not going to give them any more attention. But yeah, it's just ridiculous. I tweeted about it. I mean, the times must be really hard if you're struggling for subscriptions or something, and you have to say something like that. Because I understand Jalen Carter didn't put up the sack numbers that he did in the first half over the second half, but pressures were right there. I tweeted it out. He had about 20 total pressures in the first half of the season, and then 18 in the second half. So, I mean, he was still getting to the quarterback at the same rate pretty much. He was actually playing less snaps after they made the change to defensive coordinator. So I don't know if that was a Matt Patricia problem or if he was just kind of hitting that rookie wall. But either way, he looks phenomenal this year. All signs point to him being in great condition. He said that he's been working on his conditioning and planning for more snaps. Him and Jordan Davis have both said that. And if you look at what Vic Fangio did in Miami, Christian Wilkins obviously had the best year of his career as far as rushing the passer. So it's going to be exciting to see what he can do with Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, and all those young guys up front.
Thank you. I'm in total agreement, but just again to make sure that people.
It's sad that we even have to address it.
It really is because I was
that's
shocked.
The world that we live in.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes, because I was shocked at the same time. I was like, "Hang on, is that real?" And then I start getting like tagged in a lot of these on Twitter, and having a family day and stepping away from everything, and then like see 20 different notifications. Like, what's going on? And then, are you kidding me? This is the topic of all things where we have to argue or get into a potential Jalen Carter being a bust. Like I can understand some others if you want to just throw those out there. To me, I'm not buying the Jordan Davis, but it's fair. It's fair. You have first round pick, a guy of his quality, his caliber. He's shown some conditioning issues. Like I can somewhat understand if you want to make that case an argument.
Well, I feel like the thing with Jordan Davis is obviously that Kyle Hamilton was available too, and we've seen the player that he developed into. So it's kind of like that Brandon Graham, Earl Thomas thing that we went over for decades or whatever. So, I mean, it's just that the fact that you passed on this guy to take this guy, but Jordan Davis plays a position as a nose tackle that's never going to really put up crazy numbers. I mean, so if he gets like 4 or 5 sacks, that would be a lot. So people expecting him to get like 12 sacks and 70 tackles and put up these gaudy numbers, that was just never going to happen because of the position that he plays. So, I mean, don't expect that with Vic Fangio either. So it's just the question is what the value of the position that they took at the pick. So do you take a nose tackle that high? But that's obviously a question. But nose tackles usually aren't freakishly as big and athletic as he was coming out either. So, I mean, it's kind of a decision that you live with.
Total fair. And agree with you on that side. Like you say, he said he's in the best shape of his life. We've gotten that for consecutive years. So, you still take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because last season he was and now this season he is. But you do want to see that next career progression. You mentioned it with a Christian Wilkins. I mean, you can go even much further back and looking at Akeem Hicks and how he was able to vault his career with a Vic Fangio defense. And so he's always been spoken of and taught of as a teacher of the game, an influencer, a motivator. He's going to for sure demand the most possible out of his players. I mean, listen to his press conference and hating on load management in the NBA and just things like that. So I'm like, hey, look, he's an old school coach. The players, they understand that, they realize it, but they love it. I mean, you hear Jordan Davis, you hear Jalen Carter, you hear all these Nolan Smith, these other guys that are just saying, yeah, that's what we got from Kirby Smart. That's the Georgia program. If we think even all the way back to last year at OTA, or I guess maybe the training camp, Brandon Graham saying, man, all these Georgia dogs, these Philly dogs are saying, like, our camp was harder. Are you kidding me? Like, our camp in Georgia was harder than here. And so it's like, okay, maybe that's not the best sign if we're hearing that. But yes, I'm in agreement with you. I hope that Jordan Davis can take that next step. But again, no one's saying here he's going for double-digit sacks or really anything crazy. But it's to help Jalen Carter. I mean, they're both in tandem. Like, if Jordan Davis is on the field and he's playing up to his potential, like, honestly, where is Jalen Carter's ultimate ceiling if he's getting help from JD there?
I mean, you have to think all-pro. I mean, first team all-pro because he kind of showed those flashes and now Aaron Donald retired. So you kind of have that whole defensive tackle for all these first team all-pro, Pro Bowl, stuff like that. So, I mean, the flashes that he showed last season were downright dominant. And if you go based off the first half with the sack numbers he was putting up, he was on pace to make one of those first or second team all-pro teams as a defensive tackle. So, I mean, now if you put him in the right system and guys like Jordan Davis and Milton Williams step up around him where they can't just be blocked by one person and they can double team or triple team Jalen Carter, I mean, you really can't put a roof on that guy because it's just, we saw the flashes last season and I feel like if he's put in that kind of Christian Wilkins role where he can kind of just beat guys and show off his athleticism and his speed and what he can do, line up in different spots. I feel like he can do a lot of damage this year.
If it wasn't obvious, this is clearly the Philly Dog section of our show and podcast here, because the next natural question is Nolan Smith, and bringing that up. There's tons of hype, and we have talked about this. I don't know. I've lost count by this point of Nolan Smith, and people saying he's a bust and he's going to be. It's like, oh, my gosh. I know it's the instant gratification, but the dude literally had one season, didn't get to play much snaps, had a shoulder issue, was still trying to figure out a defense that then got changed to another defensive coordinator. So there's all these things that happened, and by the way, kind of like you're talking about there. Really, no one had a great season. Certainly towards the latter part of the season, you can't hardly say a single guy there. And so, second year, Nolan's going to play more. You're going to ask more from him. Said that he's been putting on more weight. I think it was obvious probably from looking at the press conference, but we can get into the whole, analyze from little picture overall. Or I guess what's the bigger element here? Is it the weight and the size, or the learning from Fangio, or maybe even a combo from both of those?
I think it's kind of a combination of both, because if you look at last season, you talk about putting young players in a position to succeed, and it was kind of the complete opposite for him, because he barely played. Then he was kind of thrown in once they made the change to defensive coordinator, and he was kind of out there just playing off pure effort, because he was honestly, by the end of the season, he kind of looked like arguably their best edge rusher, because he was just not stopping, where the other guys were kind of just, once they were stopped once, they were kind of just giving up, or they were dropping back or whatever. I feel like he was just going 100% whenever he was out there, and it kind of was probably because he barely played for the first half or first 3 quarters of the season. So he kind of just had that opportunity and was just out there going crazy. But I feel like he's just going to benefit so much from having these coaches that are in there with him now in the building. Both, he talked about Clint Hurtt as the defensive line coach, and then Washburn as the edge coach, and then obviously Vic Fangio and his mentality. So I just feel like they're in a much more stable situation for all of these young players, not just Nolan Smith. But I also feel like people need to kind of temper their expectations, because I don't know if he's going to play a ton of snaps either. He might only play like 30-40% of snaps, if that, because you kind of have the guys ahead of him, Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, Zack Baun, if he plays on the edge or linebacker or whatever, BG. So he has a clear path to 70-80% of snaps. So he might also not have double-digit sacks. He might only have 5-6 sacks. So, people just have to kind of temper their expectations. These guys are still young. They're still growing, but he's definitely, the situation as a whole is much better for him up front.
I said this on, I think it was a live stream that I had on Friday, but talking about Nolan and just his persona, the swag, everything else. Like, Nolan is I don't think it's a stretch to say Nolan's a fan favorite just based off of his personality. I'm not saying play style or anything else, but like just the personality he brings. He is the fill-in to me for BG. Not again in terms of what he's going to hopefully he does produce, but I'm just saying in terms of that personality that he brings, similar happy juice energy.
On the BG laugh though.
That's true. He does need to, because we need something in that. Yes, but in terms of the happy juice energy, bringing that, you love to see it. But you could tell, and if you've not watched the Nolan Smith press conference, I highly encourage, go look it up and go watch it. But like, he had a different level of confidence. I think you could see it, the way that he's talking about playing the position, the look into this season. And it's always great, because I think that, we assume this, but him saying like, look, I understand. I know that people were saying they want me to get to this level. It's not like I didn't go into it hoping and wanting to have 10 plus sacks. But in reality, this is what happened last year. Didn't get the snaps and all these other things, but he has that confidence. And so he had the scope to clean out the shoulder. Hopefully there's no lingering issues. He doesn't want to talk about it at all, which is perfectly fine. So he just moved on from it in the press conference. But you want him to be healthier. You see what he can bring to the game. And to your point, later in the season last year, not that anyone was playing great, but I would agree with you. He was one of those brighter spots, and especially against the run, when you saw a lot of times guys just being like, well, I'm going straight for the quarterback, to possibly sack Hunt, and he's containing the edge and actually making some stops. So hopefully there. And you can tell I'm fired up about it, because anytime we talk about Nolan, I am very hyped. I still have a lot of positivity for him. I think he's going to do good. My prediction was like 6 to 7 sacks, and that sounds like maybe about where you're at. Would you deviate from that a little bit, or about there?
I feel like that's pretty fair. I'd probably go 5 to 6 just to be a little bit safer. But yeah, 7's not crazy, because
okay.
We don't know how these guys are going to look in Fangio's scheme playing true stand-up outside linebacker either, especially a guy like Josh Sweat. So, we'll see what happens. But I feel like Nolan Smith, people are giving up on him after 1 year. I think that's just ridiculous. I feel like you have to give these guys at least 2-3 years before you really judge who's a bust, who's not, or who's struggling, who's not, especially when you look at the situation. Any team that switches defense coordinators mid-season, it's just these guys weren't put in a situation to succeed. So Give him a full season with one defensive coordinator. I feel like people always talk about how Jalen Hurts kind of went through a different offense coordinator from dating back to college until now. But with these defensive guys, they're not giving them that same situation where they dealt with that change mid-season, which is just insane, especially as a rookie. So give these guys another season before you start judging them or calling anybody a bust. It's just ridiculous.
It's a great analogy, honestly. Yeah, the consistency, something to rely on. Say, hey, there's some sort of normalcy or something that I can count on, and to not have that in your rookie year, sure, it's understandable. It would be alarming and cause some problems and everything else, which is unfortunately what we saw. So, but having said, talking about the unknowns or some guys that may be living up to expectations or surpassing those. Zack Baun is a continual name that comes up every single week to talk about because it's another highlight or it's another thing that people saw. And within the last session during the voluntary OTAs, he made a pick. And not only did he intercept the pass, but it was over the middle intended for A.J. Brown. So you pick off Jalen Hurts over the middle as your off-ball linebacker. I know there's some hype and some speculation and going, maybe he won't be there. So far, he's making the case to be a starting linebacker.
So he's not a first-team All-Pro already? Or is that...
We haven't gotten there yet.
But yeah, I mean...
We're on our way.
We kind of joked about, last time we spoke about Zack Baun, that, is he actually going to play edge, or was this kind of just a trick from Vic Fangio or whatever? But yeah, it seems like he really is going to play inside linebacker because he's been there for a few practices in a row now. So obviously we'll see what happens moving forward with mandatory minicamp and then training camp. But all signs point to him doing pretty well there. And I brought up that his size is something that they don't really have at the position. So a guy that's 6'3", 240, 250, whatever he's weighing in now, with his athleticism that I shared the tweet that he spent 2015 of him dunking in high school. I think you shared it as well in a recent video.
I saw that.
So I mean, the guy seems like he's a freak athlete, and I feel like this might be his untapped potential where he was kind of playing on the edge this whole time, very, very little bit at inside linebacker. But now Fangio and Bobby King, the linebacker coach, maybe they see something in him, and they're giving him that opportunity because if they're going to be using these guys in coverage more or blitzing here and there, he has that experience doing both. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. He can't really do anything wrong because if anything, if he doesn't pan out, then you just throw him on the edge and he could rotate in there. So kind of just see what happens as Nakobe Dean works his way back. Devin White obviously only has 1 year on his deal. He signed a 1-year deal with Philly. So if this can kind of be their pair to go with this season with Devin White and Zack Baun, and then you kind of sign whoever looks better, and then you have them and Dean and Trotter moving forward or whatever. But it's just a little bit more talent than they've had in recent years at linebacker.
It's a good problem to have. And also, it was at least notable to see in 11-on-11s, they eventually got to some of the drills on 11-on-11, and Devin White and Nakobe Dean were the ones swapping out, but yet Zack Baun stayed out there on the field as the will linebacker. So, again, we have speculation of, okay, who's going to be the Mike, who's going to be the green dot wearer, but you see not as much. There were a little bit in 7-on-7s of Nakobe Dean going there, and Andrew DeCecco, shout out to him, had made the case or the argument of, possibly do you look at Nakobe as a potential for will? Nakobe was asked that in his press conference, I don't know, a month ago or whenever that press conference was, and he's like, hey, football's football, I'm willing to play it. But still, as you're talking about there with the size and what guys bring to the table, it's a totally fair point. You could look at coverage grades and Zack Baun not playing much in those positions and everything else. That's understandable. But in the limited sample size, you could also argue, well, maybe he hasn't had enough snaps to fully prove that he or can he not cover. And with the size and athleticism he brings, I'm interested to see. So who knows? Will he be the Christian Ellis of last year, with people getting a little bit hyped, or is there something more? I think, okay, obviously there's probably a little bit more than that because Fangio made the signing very quickly in free agency. But I am still going to say, and I've said this from very, very early on, but he is my pick. If I'm just telling you, he is going to be one of the starting linebackers. I'm not changing that.
I mean, we talked about it when he was signed, that he was kind of the Andrew Van Ginkel light version, I guess, the Five Below version of Andrew Van Ginkel. So, I mean, it seems like all signs are pointing to that because that's exactly what he was going to play last season in Miami before they had all those injuries on the edge. So, we'll see what happens now, kind of see what happens. Hopefully they don't have any injuries on the edge, and we can kind of see what this kind of edge rusher, inside linebacker hybrid role can kind of do in Vic Fangio's scheme because it seems like Zack Baun has the size and the athleticism to pull it off.
And again, he's intercepting Jalen Hurts. Not that he's the only one, because Jalen has thrown multiple interceptions, and by all accounts, is being. I was going to say we're just going to move on from the Kenny Pickett thing because Kenny threw interceptions too, right? So however, just to real quick touch on it. Is there any concern with Jalen? Because I asked you last time, right? Now Jalen's thrown 2 interceptions this last media session. So we have multiple times. He's thrown some interceptions, 7-on-7, 11-on-11s, no pads. Any concern?
No, none at all. Because, I mean, it's just, in the words of Iverson, we talking about practice? Because it's just like,
Thank you.
At the end of the day, this stuff really doesn't mean much. It's just kind of installing the system. It's the first time these guys are really running these plays against defenses or offenses. So I really wouldn't read too much into what's happening, especially OTAs. This is so early in the offseason, and he doesn't have A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, or whoever's in and out and there, not there. So, I mean, you have to factor all of that in. Obviously, and you can kind of look at it on the flip side where, like, this is great. Defense is playing well. So, I mean, based on how off last season was, obviously people are concerned about Jalen Hurts' interceptions and whatnot, but I'd rather see him turn the ball over now than in games where it actually matters. So, I mean, people kind of go back to when Patrick Mahomes was throwing like 4 interceptions in his second season, then turned into arguably the greatest quarterback ever. So, true. I mean, you really can't read too much into this stuff. I mean, people throw interceptions. It happens all across the league. If a guy's playing I remember when Sam Bradford had a perfect preseason game and people were ready to crown him as the best quarterback in all of Eagles history. So, I mean, even preseason, you can't read too much into this stuff. I mean, wait till the games matter, and then we'll see what happens. If you're just based on Jalen Hurts' history, I would give him the benefit of the doubt.
And I mean, you know, kind of what you were saying there is Patrick Mahomes through the interceptions became the best quarterback. So maybe that's the trajectory for Jalen. No, I'm just, you know, we do believe in Jalen Hurts. But for those that were making the argument or actually want to get out there to the extreme, because there are some that, Kenny Pickett's outperforming. Jalen threw 2 interceptions. Kenny Pickett threw interceptions. Tanner McKee threw an interception to Shon Stephens. So really the only quarterback who has an unblemished record so far is Will Grier. So maybe we should give him more of a shot if we're going to.
And he switched to number 13. So QB1 Will
fair.
Grier.
Yeah, maybe so. Don't say we didn't tell you first. But no, in all seriousness though, John Ross, because we have to talk about him. After OTAs, and he made some good catches, looked pretty good, a great press conference, and the change of his mentality, what he talked about there. You texted me actually, was like, man, I'm excited to talk about this. So very curious to get your take on John Ross. We've mentioned it in the past, right? Whenever he was officially signed, like, could he be the answer as an outside wide receiver in addition to depth that you need, especially after DeVonta Parker retired? But I am interested to hear what you think about John Ross, especially after the press conference and seeing him there.
Yeah, so I said it before, and I don't know if we were talking about more so when I think he tried out, or maybe did we talk about it afterwards? I don't know. But either way, regardless, I feel like now, especially with DeVonta Parker not there, I tweeted how they needed somebody with that outside experience. And I feel like if you have A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, Parris Campbell, Johnny Wilson, and then Anaya Smith, you kind of have that 6th spot where some people want to just put Britton Covey in there. But considering that they have kind of more returner options on their team now than they did last year, I feel like there's no guarantee. And he's 27 years old. So John Ross is only 28. So it's not like he's this young guy that has all this time left. So Britton Covey was kind of an older rookie when he came in. So I feel like John Ross has that experience on the outside. And we're both fathers. So hearing him talk about how his kid and being home with his kid kind of changed his whole perspective and made him kind of appreciate opportunities more. I feel like that's a real thing because, I mean, I don't want to get too emotional, but I'm a father of 2 just like you. And when I feel like I was kind of getting into like my late 20s, early 30s, I'm only 31, but like you kind of get into that lull of life where like, you're like, what am I doing? I'm just going to work until I retire or whatever. But like, then you have a kid and it's just like, you have that thing to put that person to put a smile on their face and kind of help them grow and bring them along. So I don't want to get too deep into it, but hearing him talk about that was just, it resonated with me. And I feel like obviously on the field, we saw the clips where he was moving really well in those drills. And he even talked about how he felt faster. He thinks he's faster than he was kind of at his peak. And we don't know if that's true, but looking at the Eagles roster at wide receiver, they don't really have any of those guys with blazing speed like everybody's favorite Quez Watkins. So, I mean, if John Ross can kind of bring that factor along with kind of that mindset that they kind of could use in the wide receiver room and the speed on the outside and the experience on the outside, I feel like why not? Why can't he win the spot as a 6th wide receiver if they choose to keep one? I can see him easily beating out a guy like Britton Covey or whoever else you want to name behind those 5 receivers. So, I mean, it was just cool to see him talk about it and open up about his kid and how that really changed his perspective on life.
Totally agree. Could not agree more. Again, like you say, as being a dad, the perspective on life, what that changes, the mindset of you. I mean, you can think about not only like real life sections, but Hollywood movies and fighting for your kids. I immediately thought, I don't know why, but Cinderella Man. Just hearing that, you're just fighting for something different, right? You're fighting for your family, but to change your perspective and actually going in there. So to hear him make that comment, I was like, again, and I'll just say this, like just objectively, it was still like, well, I'm not really sure that he's going to make the roster. That doesn't mean that I wasn't like, I hope that he can. I hope that he could turn his story around from being the former first-round pick and everything else like that. But there was naturally some extra rooting interest. You hear that underdog story, like, okay, well, let's see if he can turn this around. If he is faster consistently, like you mentioned, I mean, it's an automatic, I think, because you say, hey, look at that guy. He was able to do some good things on the field. It is without pads, yes, and we all know that. But you keep this up, it wouldn't be too unrealistic if he were to make the roster. So we'll see. I'm excited.
And anytime a guy brings up their kids and starts getting a little emotional, that's it. I'm in. I'm gonna start tearing up.
I'm with you too. It was the same thing whenever any of them have done it, but like whenever Jason Kelce said the best thing that you could be in this world as a dad, be a father, be present as a parent. I'm like, oh God, I'm just not gonna make it through. There's so many tears.
Where are my tissues? Let me get a tissue.
It was not intended for this recording here, but that's where this thing's gone. So, but no, I do. I love the life perspective again to get back to the Eagles, but it is important, I think, just for people to see and him even understanding it. Put things into perspective. There's more important things in life. Maybe don't get the mental toughness, the sports psychology. I know it's just grown like crazy recently, and understandably so, I think very well, because people do need to understand and need help and other avenues to get that help. But to put things in perspective, certainly with family. So kudos to him, rooting for John Ross. Another receiver, though, that we should bring up is Parris Campbell, and you brought up him briefly as well. I mean, wide receiver 3, getting those first-team reps. Isaiah Smith did finally get on the field, but very limited. I think it was, I don't know if he got any 7-on-7s from what I saw. I know he muffed a punt and maybe gone through drills, but I don't think he actually got in competition with the other guys yet. But still, Parris Campbell looks like he's going to have the chance to win the job, as we talked about. And again, another practice. It's only been 2 of actually being able to see the guys, but showed out so far and showed some promising things with Jalen Hurts. So any new thoughts there with Parris Campbell in the offense, the weapon that he is?
Well, another guy that I love what I heard from him, because I feel like he kind of talked about opportunity and how much he kind of gravitated towards Philly because of Nick Sirianni and coaches he had experience with. So, I mean, he's saying all the right things. Obviously, he's doing all the right things on the field. A bunch of reports said that Hurts was throwing to him a ton, which we know that Hurts won't throw to people. I've mentioned it before, Jack Stahl and guys that were in there where he kind of just didn't even look their way. So the fact that they're kind of already developing that really great, and obviously it seems like he is now, but the favorite to win that wide receiver 3 spot because of his experience, both on the field and then with Sirianni and that connection that they have. And he's kind of a perfect fit in Kellen Moore's offense where he can kind of be moved around a little bit. He has the speed. He ran a 4.3, so he has the speed to stretch the field that they wanted Watkins to do that he didn't do too good of a job at. But if Campbell can stay healthy, I feel like he's easily the front runner for that wide receiver 3 spot. And it's not a slight at guys like Johnny Wilson or Isaiah Smith or anybody like that. It's just the fact is that he has experience and they don't really have much outside of him. So it seems like he's going to be the clear front runner for that spot going into training camp.
There you go. And it'll still be fun to see, again, your point of the camp battle and what Isaiah Smith brings to the field. But you like the speed, you like the ability. Certainly if he can have more of that work ethic, I don't know what it is, honestly, the show up in big moments. And unfortunately, we can't really go a single recording without mentioning Quez's name. Eventually we will.
It's my fault. It's my fault this time. I'll take that.
That's fair. It's good on you to say that. But it's one of us every recording. So it may take until the Eagles play and then we see wide receiver 3 do well. That it's like, all right, he's completely gone, removed. We don't even have to think about him again. But it is a fair point, certainly when we talk about speed. Staying with the receivers, though, more positives, obviously. You see a Jalen Waddle contract get done. Congrats to him for all that money. I mean, what in the world is DeVonta Smith so much underpaid now? And I didn't go back, but I can think too, whenever Smitty did sign the contract, of a couple comments. Now, they may have been trolls, but I can think to a couple comments I've got of saying, oh, that's ridiculous. Why are we paying him so much money? That's way too much for us. You look at more of these contracts, and the longer that this plays out, the more guys that get deals. It's just an insane fact that you have Smitty on a $75 million, $51 million guaranteed when Jalen Waddle is $75 million guaranteed. Like, how he's a genius And the Cowboys, by the way, are just losing everything because they're taking forever to sign this. But how great is it for, his contract and also AJ's with these others getting done?
It's just insane that Howie Roseman keeps doing this. He keeps getting ahead of the market. He did it with Jalen Hurts last offseason. Everybody knew quarterbacks were getting paid, and he kind of got ahead of the line and got his done. And this time he did it with 2 different players. So, I mean, it's absurd because if you look at the names that still have to get paid, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, these are a bunch of guys that are going to probably all make more than DeVonta Smith. So the fact that he already got it locked in, I mean, it helps that Smith kind of said, like, hey, listen, I love being here. It feels like a family. Like, it didn't really seem like money was a factor. I mean, obviously that's easy to say when you're getting $51 million guaranteed, but
true.
I mean, at the same point, he could have easily held out and waited for these guys like these other guys are doing. So, I mean, that speaks to people want to talk about the culture in Philadelphia and the players hate Nick Sirianni or they hate Jalen Hurts or everybody that's re-signing clearly doesn't hate being here. So, I mean, these are all their best players that are signing extensions. All the rookies seem happy. So, I mean, I wouldn't worry too much about the culture. And I feel like the fact that Howie Roseman is able to sign these guys to deals because you don't think A.J. Brown knew Tyreek Hill wants to do more money or that these other guys are going to get paid. He could have easily waited as well. So you can kind of throw all that diva nonsense out the window. These guys want to be in Philadelphia, and they made that point clear this offseason.
You're right. I love the vibes around the team too because of the point that you make. They want to be here. You can see it. You see the competition, the fun that they're having, the small glimpses we're seeing behind the scenes of the squad and everything else. Incredibly exciting. And we're going to get lots more of that. We've only got a couple days of mandatory OTAs, and then unless there's any other random additions, I mean, it's going to be a long break until training camp whenever they're actually going to come back. But having mandatory OTAs, you'll see most of the guys. I would assume that James Bradberry, unless something happens until then. But anything that you're looking forward to, or maybe the biggest thing you're looking forward to with mandatory OTAs coming up for the next couple days?
Well, I feel like really the only storyline you could really look at is James Bradberry going to be there or not? I know you said it already, but like really everything else has kind of been going almost too smooth for the Eagles this offseason. It feels like things are going really well for them. So nobody's really missed anything for like controversial reasons or anything besides James Bradberry. So luckily they handled all their contract situations. They didn't really have anybody holding out or any things to worry about with that. So I mean, besides that like fine coming up for potential fine for the Saquon Barkley situation, besides that, there's really only Bradberry to worry about. And that's really not even a big question because of what they did in the draft and because of how good Isaiah Rodgers is looking as well. So, I mean, the Eagles are in a good spot regardless. I mean, I guess people want to see Jalen Hurts not throw as many interceptions, but once again, that kind of means nothing. So, really, at this point, I know it kind of sucks to say, but like, really, none of this matters at the end of the day. I mean, it's all fun to talk about, and it's good to get our little football fix for before this kind of long break that you talked about. But I mean, this is the reality of it is the games are going to matter, and this is kind of just leading up to that. But it's good to talk about, and obviously, I love coming on here and talking to you about it all.
I appreciate it as always. Pro Football Network, Anthony DiBona. Make sure to follow, subscribe, everything else here. I mean, great content. Everything else, is well coming through the rest of the situation. And you did mention, we would be remiss if we didn't actually bring this up, but you did mention the Eagles locker room, the culture, everything out. Thankfully, we don't have a Kyrie Irving. And I say that because to end this, we have to. The NBA Finals are up, Boston Celtics, Dallas Mavericks, and, we might as well go ahead and end it with a prediction and thoughts with some NBA.
I mean, I might upset a few people. They get mad whenever I tweet about them, but I am a diehard fan of the Celtics, so I'm excited, but I'm nervous at the same time because the Celtics have, despite all the good that they've done this season, they kind of have they've built a reputation of kind of playing down to their competition, and Dallas is playing really, really well right now, arguably better than them. So they obviously beat better teams, so everybody wants to question, Boston played this team without this guy. They played this G League team. They played this, which is all fair arguments. But, I mean, then again, they kind of didn't load manage their way through the season. They kind of played their guys, and they earned the first seed. So it's kind of nice for a team to be rewarded for that. But to not babble on too long, I just feel like Porzingis is supposed to be healthy, so that's obviously huge for them. I feel like he kind of pulled Dallas's bigs out of the paint with that because Karl Anthony Towns' last series wasn't really knocking down any threes, only here and there. So, I mean, the Celtics, the Eagles, I'm so used to talking about them. So the Celtics kind of have that threat with Al Horford and Porzingis. They can both shoot threes. So, obviously, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. I mean, but then again, you can't discount Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic just going off for 30, 40 each or whatever. So, I mean, obviously, I'm a fan, so I'm going to say Celtics. I'll say in 7 just to be conservative, but I'll just be happy if they win it at all. So I'll take it.
There you go. And also the multi-talented Anthony DiBona, dropping some NBA knowledge for those that don't know. Very, very well versed in the NBA.
Leave a comment if you want a basketball podcast with me and Josh.
Yeah. Starting it up, we got some time, but no, I'm going to say Dallas in 6. I'm in Dallas, so there's a Dallas fandom.
You can end it now. All right, I'll see you next time.
We're done. Okay, we may see pending. We'll see how this one goes, but we might not see Anthony again. No, we're just kidding. This is a blast, like I say, as always.
Wait. Honestly, if Kyrie knocks the Celtics out in the finals, I might need a week or two to myself.
Okay. We'll see. We'll check in with you. We'll make sure that you're doing good. But this is a blast as always, man. Appreciate you coming on. Again, everybody appreciate it as well. Let us know comments, thoughts below, OTAs, biggest takeaways, NBA talk, whatever you want. Just drop a comment. But we'll try to get to as many as possible. And until next time, we will see you guys. Go Birds.